ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the times of challenge and controversy. Martin Luther King Jr. We are in a time where voting rights, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, healthcare rights, education rights, our indigenous peoples' rights, DACA and immigration rights, free speech rights, and free presses rights are all under assault. Locally, our water, our wind, our rights are vigilant against air and water polluters. CPR, Connect Plus Respect, is trying to save a community resource in the McBride Bridge. Local health care for all educates and promotes single-payer health care. Erie County United is advocating CBAs or community benefit agreements to make sure that local neighborhoods are not forgotten and the development happens. Ceasefire PA, championed by the Benedictines for peace, is passionate about reducing gun violence and saving lives. I am encouraged by these and so many other local groups energized around social justice and rights issues. Tonight's speakers will offer education, facts, and discussion regarding the decriminalization of possession of small amounts of marijuana and paraphernalia. At its core, it is an attempt to reduce mass incarceration and save lives, allowing for more citizens to become productive members of society. Our moderator this evening is Marcus Atkinson, who is known to be a passionate participant in community discussions, pastor of community engagement at Grace Church, and executive director of Serve Erie, host of Next on WQLN Radio, and Erie Now on QLN TV. He serves on the board of Martin Luther King Center and is a former director of the YMCA's Teen Center. Marcus, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. It's a dry crowd tonight. Good evening, everyone. You know, when they asked me about moderating for this event this evening, and they told me what the subject matter was, I said, you need a referee, you need a moderator. Every time you have this discussion, it doesn't matter where we are, it always turns into a very, very spirited debate, and rightfully so. It's a subject that people are not short on when it comes to opinions. It's a subject where normally when people have their opinions, they are pretty entrenched in their positions. And it's a subject as well that over time I've seen people evolve in how they feel about this particular subject. Art said it correctly. Right now I'm very excited, not just as a citizen of Erie, but as a citizen of the world, of this country and in particular. It's about all the activity going on with people paying attention to what's going on around them and participating in what's going on around them. Right here in Erie, there's a lot of efforts going on in order to try to address social change and make Erie a better place than the way we found it. We see things going on nationally that make some people uncomfortable, but I think we need to talk when it comes to certain subjects. This is one of them, so I ask that you bring your passionate dispositions. At the end, we'll give you an opportunity for Q&A, and whatever questions you may have, take notes, mental notes, physical notes, whichever works best for you when these speakers are speaking, and get a feel for where they're coming from and come up with a question accordingly. We want the Q&A to be robust when this is all said and done. I want to introduce our first speaker. I'll give the biographies of each of these speakers before we bring them up. Rep. Ed Gainey, and first of all, thank you for the travels. I believe he said it was Pittsburgh and then here from Harrisburg. So State Representative Ed Gainey brings new leadership and a new vision to the neighborhoods that make up the 24th Legislative District. His legislative priorities are labor issues, working class families, transportation, education, community development, and enhancement. Before joining the House of Representatives in 2013, he worked as the Community Development Specialist for the City of Pittsburgh, where he implemented several initiatives such as business seminars, the Minority Media Initiative, Diversity Education for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and the 52 Weeks of Peace Initiative. Gainey is a board member for Divine Intervention Ministries and Promise organizations. He has received several community awards and certificates. His most recent award was from the New Pittsburgh Courier for being one of the 50 Men of Excellence in the Pittsburgh region. In 2010, he received the Family Life Empowerment Community Center Award from the Northside Church of God in Christ for his accomplishments in community outreach. In 2009, he received the Pittsburgh and Allegheny County Public Service Awards from Champion Enterprise. He also participated in the planning and implementation of the BA 6th grade mentor program, which was designed to mentor 6th graders in the Pittsburgh public schools. In 2010, he became the first African American to serve as chairman of the Pittsburgh City Democratic Committee. He currently serves as Allegheny County Democratic Committeeman in the 12th Ward, 10th District. He received a bachelor's degree in business management from Morgan State University in 1994, played varsity basketball, and graduated from Peabody High School in 1988, same year I graduated. Gainey was raised in the East Liberty section of Pittsburgh. He is married and has 3 children, and he and his wife attend Cornerstone Baptist Church in the Lincoln-Lemington section of Pittsburgh. Ladies and gentlemen, Rep. Ed Gainey.
Before I begin, I just want to give honor to the Jefferson Educational Society for having such a conversation such as this. I love these conversations because I think it brings people together. I think one of the things that I notice about conversations like this is community development, because we're talking about a humanity issue. And in this humanity issue, we're talking about people's rights. And before I begin, there's certain things I have to do as being an elected official that I feel that I should. One, I know I'm in the home of State Representative Harkins and Bizarro, and I want to honor and make sure that I at least acknowledge them here tonight. I also have a good friend by the name of David Dix that comes from the Erie community, and I know that his family is prevalent here, and I would not want to come here and not say hello to the Dix family. First and foremost, I think that's respectful for someone that has built the character of a family such as the Dix family, so I want to make sure that I mention them. Today, I come to talk about decriminalization or legalization of marijuana, and I thought this was so timely. When they asked me, I jumped on it because I just had a conversation with Representative Sterler. Representative Sterler is the chairman of the public policy, public hearings for the Democratic side. And I asked him this year, I said, going into the summer, can we go across the state? And can we have a conversation across the state that talks about which way the state should go? Not whether the state should or shouldn't, but which way the state should go. Should we focus on decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana? Now, I know that there's a lot of conversation and a lot of misinformation, but there's some things I want to start with real quick just to set the tempo. One is that since the beginning of any society, whether it's the American society or any other society that has existed throughout this great world, you have always had people getting high. There's no question about it. It's just that in 1937, some of the rules have changed, and now if you get caught selling or getting high, they give you an opportunity to go to jail. For my community, that's a hurt piece because we're likely to go to jail for marijuana sales 8 times more than my white counterparts. Even though it's a statement that we get high at the same rate, when you look at the scale of the jail, it don't look like we get high at the same rate. It only looks like me. That is something that hurts humanity, because here's how it has hurted humanity throughout the years. I have fathers that have been taken out of the family home for either using or selling. So now I got 2 or 3 generations in the penitentiary that have been removed from the home that could be an advocate in the home right now to stop some of this craziness of the violence that has happened in inner cities. But they are paying a price for a choice that they made, the same choice that we have in America, that can't stop the same drug from coming into our country, that can't stop the same borders for being safe, but all of a sudden you want to put us in jail for the same reason you said we should not run contraband, but Oliver North ran contraband in 1980. The same reason why you say we should say no to drugs is the same reason why we ran it through America, but yet the penitentiary looks like me. There's a problem with the justice system. I talked to an officer a long time ago, high up in the state troopers. I said, when? Give me a date that we can stop the war on drugs. He said, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I said, no, I'm tired of the tactics. What I'm asking for is tell me when we can stop the war on drugs. He said, Rep. Gainey, let me be honest. We can never stop the war on drugs. But if we change the paradigm to how we deal with this drug crisis, here's what we can get. Even though in 50 years we have spent over $70 billion and we have used most of that money in incarceration instead of education and rehabilitation and telling the truth about things, here's what he told me. If we change the paradigm to how we do this drug culture, here's what would have to happen. I wouldn't have to lay off people. I'd have to lay off departments. I'd have to lay off DEA. I'd have to lay off AFT. I'd have to lay off task force. I'd have to lay off a lot in a game that we're playing that we have not succeeded in since the beginning of the game that we're playing. $70 billion in 50 years, we would be able to reduce majority of the deficit. You want to talk about what options we have. So they look at Colorado and they say, well, we've had more accidents because of legalized marijuana. We've had more problems. But here's what you don't have. There's no system that is perfect. But if we're looking for the perfect system, then we are not looking for the goal of how we improve the nation. Let's talk about some of the positives that's come out of Colorado. Better police and community relationships because there's no more racial profiling. I don't have to be pulled over because you told me that I didn't stay at a stop sign longer than 5 seconds. So since I didn't stop at a stop sign, you can pull me over. I shouldn't have to have that level of fear and a racial inequality that says there's racial profiling because I want to know if you got drugs. They've improved that. They improved the fact that the penitentiary is strong because now selling marijuana wouldn't be a problem. Using marijuana wouldn't be a problem. If you want to suppress the demand of marijuana, you can't do it through incarceration. If you want to suppress it, do it through education. And through education, people will have a better choice. People say, Ed, how do you know this? Because we had a tobacco problem, and in the tobacco problem, we attacked it by doing a campaign of not smoking, and all of a sudden, because we did a campaign of education, all of a sudden, people stopped smoking cigarettes. Now less people smoke cigarettes than ever before. You got to ask yourself, if you wanted to have an impact on how you start the war on drugs, why wouldn't you do that? We have a hypocritical law, a criminal justice system that has been impacted by money laundering all throughout the United States. If any other industry did this game like this, they would change it because they would say to do the same thing for the last 50 years and get the same result is insanity. It's insanity. So let me make one more statement and I'll take my seat. They say that marijuana is a gateway drug. Tell me what prescription drugs is. Tell me what LSD is. Tell me why the rate of heroin has went up because of it. When you talk to the experts now, they're not saying that people are using these harsh drugs because of marijuana. Tell me about the medical marijuana that I've seen a patient, that I've seen somebody have a seizure, and it's not a miracle drug, but I've seen them shake it, and in 30 minutes, I've seen them come back. There's some value in that. This is not a public safety issue. To continue to think that it's a public safety issue means that we revert, dispose, and put all our resources into incarceration. Listen, we shouldn't be a nation of incarceration. We need to be a nation of education and rehabilitation. America's in recovery, and if we don't begin to do what's necessary to recover who we are, then we will be lost forever in a jail cell that is meant to put us there and not rehabilitate us. We need to have a conversation. Spiritually, we need to have a conversation. For one reason and one reason only. To allow society to destroy humanity is not to allow the God in us to live. Thank you.
Mike is hot up here, boy. Real hot. Thank you so much for that passionate explanation of your position. We want to bring our next speaker up here. Let me give her introduction. Nicole Shoenberger is an assistant professor of sociology at Penn State Erie, the Behrend College. She earned her Ph.D. at Bowling Green State University in sociology with a core focus on criminology and minors in quantitative methods and family. Her research interests include criminal dissidence, social inequities within the criminal justice system, incarceration, institutionalization, the life course perspective, delinquency, deviance, and the family. Currently, she's examining the effects of life course factors such as marriage and employment on criminal dissidents, with specific attention to how this process is affected by race, social class, and age. She is currently teaching sociology and criminology classes. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicole Shoenberger.
This is the first time I ever felt that I didn't want to follow somebody, because that was more powerful than I think what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you a lot of numbers. I think I'm going to give some background to kind of where we are at in the United States in terms of incarceration, and how this is affected with drug use in the United States. And so some of the numbers you have seen are in the pamphlet that you have, but there are about 2.4 million people incarcerated in our prisons and jails in the United States. That's a 500% increase in 40 years. Though that number has seen some small declines in the last few years, we're number one in the world for incarceration. For prisons, that equates about 612 prisoners per 100,000 U.S. adults in the United States. That means there's about 4.7 million adults also on community supervision, probation, parole, and post-prison supervision. Harsher sentences, mandated sentencing, and truth in sentencing laws, coupled with a decrease in the parole in the United States, has greatly affected our prison population. And most notable, we see this with drug incarceration in the U.S. Looking at the data between 1988 and 2012 alone, we see a 42% growth in the prison population specific to drug offenses. In particular, we see a jump from about 40,000 individuals in 1982 to over 470,000 individuals in 2015 because of drug-related offenses. With this means by 2014, 50% of all males and almost 60% of all females incarcerated are incarcerated because drug offenses in the United States. Now, this is interesting because while the incarceration boom was occurring in the United States, we actually saw huge declines in both violent property crime and violent crime and in property crime. Now, and towards this downward trend cannot be accommodated by the incarceration boom because this decline happened cross-nationally. Germany, England, France all saw a decline in crime rates regardless of how they were incarcerating people in their own countries. And further from this, what we know is that deterrence with drug-related laws have no effect on juveniles, does not have an effect on individuals who commit crime with peer delinquents, and in terms of drugs, deterrence and deterrence laws do not show much effect in terms of addiction and use of drugs. And we know this, as Representative Gainey has told us, this incarceration, this boom is not equally distributed. Sentencing policies along with bias and social class and racial disparities are seen in our system. The state of Pennsylvania has openly admitted that we have an issue with disproportionate minority contact in the criminal justice system. With this, all 9 key contact points from arrest to diversion to probation to parole, we see disproportionate minority contact in this system. And sadly, Erie County ranks 3 of the counties in the state of Pennsylvania. Minorities make up 67% of our prison population, and it is no secret that Black men are more likely to be arrested, Once they're arrested, they're more likely to be convicted, and once they are convicted, they are more likely to receive a stricter sentence than their white male counterparts. In perspective, a black man born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 chance of imprisonment, whereas a Latino man has a 1 in 6 chance of incarceration, compared to a 1 in 17 chance of a white man born in 2001 towards incarceration. Now, many of these numbers have been greatly impacted by drug laws and the war on drugs. Examining how this war was implemented, we can clearly see the disproportionate use of drug laws that heavily affected urban communities. We've all heard the differences between how they moderated crack versus crack cocaine in the urban environments compared to the middle class and upper class environments. We also seen targeting of police in certain urban environments, leading to more arrests of urban community individuals. The war on crime and the war on drugs not only has had a lasting impact on our prison boom, but it has also had a big impact on who specifically is a part of that prison boom. And we also know that incarceration has compounding negative effects on recidivism. It is no surprise that prison decreases social support, making reintegration difficult for many ex-convicts. It leads to broken homes, economic disparities, and unemployment. All of these things are correlates of crime. Drug users themselves are actually the second most likely individuals to be reincarcerated after they are released. This is second only to property crime in the United States. Now, we do know that drug laws have been created by the idea of deterrence, the idea that a rational person would think, hey, I don't want to be punished for these crimes, and I'm a rational person, so why would I choose to use these drugs? First of all, most individuals are not aware of the actual imprisonment. If I ask you, what would you get if you got caught for a gram of marijuana or an ounce of cocaine, or what would you get if you robbed somebody? Probably none of you will know, unless you might know the marijuana ones because we're talking about marijuana today. But other than that, when I ask my students, they don't know the answers either. And second of all, addiction is bigger than just deterrence. Addiction is bigger when you're talking about mental health issues, coping, anger, frustration, and the reasons why individuals are using drugs. Literature actually shows that when you increase the severity of punishment for drug-related crimes, it does not reduce the likelihood of drug use, it actually increases the likelihood of recidivism. Therefore, the drug laws have an opposite effect on what we're trying to do. And should this be a lesson for change? And could this help us lead to the idea of maybe decriminalizing laws on marijuana? We should remind ourselves that it is now just 5 years since Colorado and Washington have passed their laws decriminalizing marijuana. And what can we take from this? Well, one, Colorado alone has seen a $2.4 billion impact in their economy because of marijuana sales in their states. For every dollar spent in the industry generates almost $2.50 in economic activity. It's created jobs. California has added about 40,000 full-time jobs, and Washington and California have both added over 20,000 jobs. And these jobs are full-time jobs that pay $40,000 to $60,000 a year. So these are actually really good jobs. Projections have this increasing about 1 to 5% every year, and the Business Insider actually quotes that they believe about 250,000 jobs will be added by 2020 because of this industry. Colorado itself has seen one of its lowest unemployment rates since the last 5 years of introducing the Colorado deregulation of marijuana. Now, money and unemployment are great, but what about our crime rates? Looking at the data immediately after the introduction of recreational pot, Denver saw a 2.2 drop in violent crimes, and they also saw an 8.9% drop in property crime in the same period. Washington also recognized a 10% drop from 2011 to 2014. This is not to say if you deregulate marijuana, crime's going to go down, but it does illustrate by deregulating it, it did not impact the violent crime or property crime rates in those states. We would also like to take a longer view, if we would like to, in looking at medical marijuana laws. Here we see a decrease in violent crime in a study that looked at 11 states with these types of laws from 1990 to 2006, showed no increase in violent crime. In fact, there was a decrease in homicide and assault in those states. One major focus, though, that we need to point at is many individuals argue that we should not decriminalize drugs, especially marijuana, because we fear that our youth would increase their use of marijuana if we do so. Well, the states where marijuana has been legalized, they have not seen this increase in the drug. In fact, the acceptance of drug use has increased, but they have not seen an actual physical increase of youth in their marijuana use in those states. California did note that they thought they saw a small increase, but then they realized that trend was occurring before the deregulation of marijuana in their states. And you have to remember a few things. You have to be of age to purchase marijuana. It could be 18 to 21 in some of these states. And as we know, youth, if they want drugs, they'll get the drugs regardless of the law. You can tell them that it's legal, they'll still have access to it. If they're underage, they'll find somebody who can give it to them, or if it's illegal, they'll do the same. And so the law, in terms of this, does not impact the youth much in terms of how their mentality thinks of drug use. And you also have to realize, most teens don't understand the law. When I ask my students about medical marijuana in Pennsylvania, most of them don't know what I'm talking about. And these are college-age students, 18 through 24. If they don't know, a 14-year-old probably doesn't know. And one last thing I would like to note, we can also look internationally. We do know that Amsterdam legalized pot a very long time ago, and they did see a small increase of marijuana use when they first deregulated marijuana in their country. After that, they saw a big decline in locals in that area of marijuana use. The problem that they have, American tourists going to Amsterdam and using the drug. It's not local residents of Amsterdam. In terms of this, Amsterdam argues it's probably just as so when we think about alcohol use. Many kids see drinking alcohol under the 21 as cool, a deviant behavior, that's something that they might get into. But once you turn 21 and 22, your alcohol use starts to stabilize. It starts to decrease. Now, minus some binge drinking in college, but most often, most individuals do stabilize their drinking because it's not about the behavior anymore. And so I would like to just make an argument that criminalization of marijuana and the idea of criminalizing it, the arguments for it are a little bit shaky. When we look at drug laws, they have not been successful. They've caused an overflow and burden of the criminal justice system for non-violent offenses. Does this really protect society? Many serve long sentences with no rehabilitation, only to be placed back in the same environment with the stigma of a marked record. They commit another crime, end up back in the system. And what does that do for us and taxpayer money? It's very evident that these laws do not work for deterrence, and acceptance of marijuana is still going to continue to grow. Other states have seen an opportunity to reduce the strain of the system while creating an economic opportunity. PA is at a crossroads. If the state continues to criminalize marijuana, we need a better system to handle the cases and drug rehabilitation. And if this is not the case, we cannot just accept and turn a blind eye and assume that the system is okay, because it's not. Thank you.
Elder Dale B. Snyder's experience has resulted in a true passion to disciple and love and to exemplify an open and honest relationship with God. Elder Snyder is a second-generation AME pastor in the 3rd Episcopal District. Reverend Snyder has served as a pastor in Massillon, Youngstown, Maple Heights, Cleveland, and Columbus, Ohio. He currently serves as pastor of St. James AME Church here in Pennsylvania, here in Erie. Elder Snyder owned a family construction business alongside his father and his brothers for over 20 years and was a veteran of the U.S. Army, where he served as a chemical operations specialist. Elder Snyder graduated from David Myers College with a BS in Corporate Management and Business Administration, from Ashland University with a degree in Black Church Studies, and a graduate of Penn Theological Seminary with a master's in Divinity. Elder Snyder truly believes in a commitment to social action, to be mindful of the poor. As such, he was the recipient of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Humanitarian Award, which was presented by the Columbus Education Association. Additionally, Pastor Snyder is pleased to serve in ministry with his wife, Yolanda Snyder, and this blended family has 6 children. Ladies and gentlemen, Elder Dale B. Snyder.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Protocol already being established. I do want to thank those who have put this fantastic panel together. From the New King James Version of the Bible, I selected this pericope of scripture from Isaiah, which says, "Woe to those who decree unrighteousness, who write misfortune, which they have prescribed, who rob the needy of justice, and to take what is right from the poor, my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. Another one of my favorite texts comes from Micah, which says this here. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what the Lord does require of you, but to do justice, or justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. A study found that African Americans are incarcerated in the state of Pennsylvania and most states at a 5-to-1 times that of whites. The report, The Color Justice, Racial and Equity Disparities in State Prisons, was released by the Sentencing Project, Research and Advocacy for Reform, a national Washington, D.C. based nonprofit organization that worked towards a fair and effective U.S. criminal justice system. The group's research found, based on an average state rate of incarceration by race and ethnicity per 100,000 residents, the number of blacks likely to go to jail was 1,408 in the state of Pennsylvania, as compared to 378 Hispanics, 275 whites. This was a report that came out in 2016. With a rate of 1 in 20, ranks 8th in the nation. Pennsylvania rates 8th in the nation of incarcerating black men at an alarming rate for a small amount of marijuana. Not selling, not distributing, but having it on their possession. The state ranks 11th when it comes to female incarceration rate. Research analyst and author of this report in a statement said, public safety is a concern for all, but there should be a growing discomfort with the skewed system of mass incarceration. It has produced diminishing returns on public safety while locking up record number of people. More than 50,000 people were in prison in Pennsylvania in 2014. Blacks accounted for 48% of them. Hispanics made up 10.7%, according to the U.S. Justice Department. The particular drivers of disparity may be related to policy, offending, implicit bias, or some combination. The reports state that regardless of the cause, however, the simple fact is disparity should be a disturbing consequence and a disturbing fact to how it tears down families in minority communities, how it robs families of their fathers, women of selection of husbands, men to protect the community for small amounts of marijuana, for mandatory sentencing. The structural disadvantage in these communities affect African Americans long before they become involved in the criminal justice system. Social factors such as poverty, employment, housing, family differences come to play. Structure, disadvantage of blacks begin early in life. Thus, juveniles have the tendency to engage in delinquent behavior. As we seek ways to make the criminal justice system more fair and efficient, policymakers should adopt strategies that reduce both excessive incarceration and racial and ethnic disparities. The executive director of the Sentencing Project, unless these goals are linked with risks, seeing the continual racial disparities even through prison population may decline, the Sentencing Project also noted that the same states, the same situations are happening over and over again. I just want to focus on 4 points, and I'm going to make a statement from my heart. Decriminalizing marijuana frees up police resources to deal with more serious crimes. Statistically, The state of Pennsylvania spends over $200 million in drug crimes. Just think about what we can do with over $200 million, locking people up for having a bag of marijuana. Think about what we can do with Erie school system. Think about what we can do with a junior college. Think about what we can do with early education from 0 to 3 so that we can catch up with the rest of the world in the educational system. Think about what we can do for our seniors who are struggling with drugs and food at the end of the month. Think about what we can do in this state with over $200 million every year. As the representative said, if they stop criminalizing drug offense, they can lay off departments. Well, let me tell you something. In the 13th Amendment, once you become a criminal, you now become a slave of the state, a slave of this country. And JCPenney and Google and all these major corporations have slave people working for them in these institutions. And when they get out of prison, they can't go get a job at Google. When they get out of prison, even though they made the JCPenney shirt or some other product in that market, they can't go to that company and get a job when they're a free man, but they can still get a job in prison as a slave right here in America. So as a man of moral standards, when the crime does not fit the punishment, I believe in righteousness, but righteousness can never be favorable without mercy. You can't have a righteousness without mercy. And as a man of faith, I'm always on the side of mercy. How in the world can you incarcerate a 12, 11, or 10, a 13-year-old person who don't even understand the Constitution of this country? How in the world can we sit in our seats and be comfortable with the alarming disparities of the absence of black men in the black community? You know, I'm gonna go back a little bit further. We didn't ask to come to this country. And so when they set us free with the 13th Amendment, immediately, because you can be incarcerated, now become a slave in the South, they began to lock black people up at an alarming rate. Over 200,000 slaves who were free were now locked up for loitering, was now locked up for trespassing, and was resumed back in the slave market. So when they couldn't do that and the blacks began to leave the South and go to the North, then law enforcement came into place. So now you see the disparities in place. When people say we live in a post-racial society, I don't know what society you're looking at. I don't know how you can say racism is not a part of the criminal justice system when we are locked up. When we are locked up, almost 1 million people are locked behind bars for non-violent offenses, not murder, not rape, but non-violent offenses. And you wonder why there's crime in the neighborhood. Well, you take away the jobs. You take away quality education. You take away productive healthcare systems. You create poverty. We can spend billions of dollars on war. We'll tear down Germany and rebuild it, but we won't go into the urban cores and rebuild and use the resources that are available so that we can eliminate poverty. And let me tell you something. It was crack a few years ago, and they criminalized crack. 3 strikes and you out. Mandatory sentences. Now we got the opiate drug addiction. And all of a sudden the conversation has changed. And I'm glad the conversation is changing. I'm glad that now we have a conversation about decriminalizing drug use. And we're finding a way for reform and education and creating opportunities for our children to deal with mental illness and to deal with depression and to deal with fatherlessness and motherlessness and also peer pressure. We have to wake up as Americans because the corporations are running our country and they're running it into the ground. and the people united can never be defeated. Can y'all say that with me? And I'm going to take my seat. The people united can never what? Oh, women, y'all must not, I must be in the wrong place. I said the people united can never be what? The people, not black people, not white people, but all people. Not straight people, not gay people, but all people. Not little children, not big children, not white people, not big-nosed people, not kids, but all people. When the people become united, we can take back our government, because the government is supposed to be about the people.
And I know this goes into Q&A, but the interesting point that you made about JCPenney and Google, and we talked about this on our show and ran down this laundry list of Fortune 500 companies that contract with these prisons. It's very, very, very interesting and sad at the same time. Reverend Snyder, thank you so much for that. Our last speaker is, and everybody's been given a piece of paper. If you want to jot down questions, these three speakers that we've had thus far have really, really spurred different thoughts and questions from my own mind. I can only imagine yourselves. As things come to mind, as I said before, take notes, write a question down. When we get to Q&A, let's dive deeper into this and really unpack some of the things that we've heard this evening. Our last speaker, Dr. Balsan. Dr. Balsan grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, on the shores of Lake Michigan. Attended college at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and subsequently relocated to Pennsylvania for a pediatric residency, a chief pediatric residency, and then a neonatology fellowship at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh and McGee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh. He has previously served as the medical director of neonatal intensive care units in Youngstown, Ohio, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and for the last 12 years here in Erie at UPMC Hamot. He's an associate professor of pediatrics in the School of Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh and was recently appointed the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at Hamot. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Balsan.
Wow. How do you follow that kind of passion? I'm going to come from this from a very different perspective, I think. I'm going to talk about the people that I care for, the babies. There's long-term outcome data that indicates that executive function and actual cognitive outcomes in infants can be affected by cannabinoid exposure in utero. And because of that, both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Obstetrics and Gynecology have embarked on substance abuse screening to help take care of those infants. Unfortunately, infants' exposure to illegal substances here in Pennsylvania qualifies as an abuse by statute. That means mandatory reporting to the Office of Children and Youth, the so-called dreaded CY-47 form. It means a caseworker is assigned to that family, an evaluation including a home visit performed, and then a disposition, home with parents, a kinship planned with a grandparent or a relative, but continued parental involvement, or detainment by OCY and foster care placement with potential reunification versus adoption. The real tragic situations are when mom is incarcerated and then delivers a baby. Baby doesn't go back to mom. Baby stays with me for a while and then is placed. She is incarcerated often because of drug offenses. We already have heard the statistics. Why are women in prison? It's even worse for fathers. I don't even like to think about it. I spend my life trying to build families, and it doesn't work very well in this situation. The American Academy of Pediatrics is opposed to legalizing marijuana for recreational or medical use, but there's a flyer floating around out there right now that you may have copies of. The third paragraph reads, "The Academy also recommends that marijuana be decriminalized so that penalties for marijuana-related offenses are reduced to lesser criminal charges or civil penalties. Efforts to decriminalize marijuana should take place in conjunction with efforts to prevent marijuana use and promote early treatment of adolescents with marijuana use problems. They get it. The Academy gets it. And you know what? The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has very similar guidelines. They understand, and they also understand the disparities that all three of you folks have so admirably pointed out. I'm going to stop right there, because I think that it's important to recognize that there are professional societies out there that agree with the folks that are sitting here that this just doesn't make sense, and that education is by far and away the right way to go. Thanks.
Dr. Balsan, thank you so much for that. So we'll go right into our panel discussion on this. Let's give everybody a round of applause again for their participation. Very passionate positions. I guess I want to start with the position of, and anybody can jump in this first, of the effects on children. More often than not, when I talk to people about this, one of the first things they reach for is, you know, if this is legalized, that it will be more accessible to children. That was touched upon in several of our speeches tonight. Can somebody expand on that a little bit? I noticed you talked about that, Dr. Shoenberger. Can we all kind of touch that just a bit? Because I hear that very often.
There is no doubt that there is evidence that significant cannabinoid exposure during pregnancy and for moms that are breastfeeding is potentially detrimental in terms of long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes. There is no question about that. Vodka doesn't do a baby a lot of favors either. The idea here is responsible use is a reasonable place to be. It is not reasonable to have someone no longer available as a family member because of recreational marijuana use. That doesn't make sense. I think it does. I think if you read carefully the Academy position, they talk about education, which other panel members have also described as being the way to go. But putting people in prison does not.
I think, too, to make the point, and as you were referring, it comes down to responsibility. Are the adults in the household using whatever substance that they are using responsibly? And if we turn to alcohol, many of us have a drink, 2 drinks at night. We drink alcohol responsibly. We don't get behind the car. We abide by laws that regulate the behavior of a legal substance. And by doing so, our children are socialized to use those substances legally when they should, although every now and then they may partake illegally in alcohol use. But most children are socialized to say, this is how you drink alcohol, this is when you do it, and this is the proper time that you drink alcohol. And so if we would legalize another drug, as we've seen in Amsterdam, proper parental use of that drug around children with education as to what the drug is, why they may be using it, and when you use it could help moderate children and how they see the drug use with their parents.
The government done studies and concluded that marijuana decriminalization has virtually no effect on either marijuana use or beliefs and related attitudes about marijuana. This study was done by the University of Michigan from 1975 to 1980. Citizens who live under decriminalization laws consume marijuana at a less rate than comparable to those who live in regions with drug possession criminal offenses. So decriminalizing marijuana does not increase the use, but if you continue with the criminalization, it increases mass incarceration. So that's statistically proven. There's many reports, and this was done by the U.S. Journal of Public Health, Policy 21 157. So the facts are already been proven over and over again. Taking away the criminalization of it does not increase the use.
Talked a little bit, Dr. Shoenberger, about alcohol. I've heard so often that to bring these two, to compare these two is like comparing apples and oranges. You know, people put that argument forth often. Why is it an appropriate comparison in your opinion, and what parallels can we draw from alcohol being introduced post-prohibition to marijuana right now?
Well, I think the so-called teratogenic effects of both of these agents are pretty well laid out. The single most common substance, if you will, or environmental exposure to cause neurodevelopmental delay is, in fact, alcohol, by far. The issue is, again, it's called responsible use. It's called education. There are still 29% of the pregnant patients, or the pregnant people here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that smoke during pregnancy. We have a long ways to go. We're getting there, but we still have a long ways to go in terms of individual responsibility related to long-term outcome for our children. But I do think that there is something, the other side of this, and that's the difficulty that I have, is that I've seen firsthand the effects of incarceration. That's not healthy. Mm-hmm. That's not good for families. And I think a responsible use and education coupled with decriminalization is what we're after.
Representative Gainey, you had a thought?
Hello. First and foremost, I don't want to see no children using no type of drug. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's marijuana, alcohol, whatever it may be. I don't want to see our kids getting high. I don't. I'll be quite frank with that. I think that that's a problem not in the child, but in the family. And when you see kids getting high at 6, 7, 8 years old, that child didn't choose to go get high. That's an action of a family, and we need to address that first and foremost. Mm-hmm. Secondly is, when we talk about decriminalization of marijuana, let me share something with you. Public safety has never and never will improve public health. It'll never improve public health. The only thing that improves public safety is public health. So when you talk about criminalizing people for the use of marijuana, you are not improving public safety. You are destroying public health. Because what you're doing is you're taking that person out of the home. You're taking that person out of the community. And when you do things like that, it's detrimental to growth. Because if I take the wisdom out of your household, trust me, there'll be no growth there. And thirdly is this, when we talk about legalization, we have to ask ourselves, if we know the model to stop these deadly killings in our street, if we know the model to talk about how we get kids to not use drugs, Colorado, for example, legalized it and less youth are using marijuana. When you talk about, and you heard me say this again with the tobacco, there was a concentrated effort through an educational campaign to get our children to stop using cigarettes, and it worked. You have a model of prohibition, you have a model of campaign, but yet nobody wants to talk about that. All they want to talk about is how they can fund prisons. And so you have to wonder, if the models are out there, why are we letting special interests dictate public safety over public health when we know in the end, in order to improve public safety, we must deal with public health? Mm.
There's a prevailing thought in certain circles that decriminalizing marijuana would cause more negative shops, if you will, to spring up in African American and urban neighborhoods throughout this country. What do you say to that?
That our government has a responsibility to zone. So a lot of these liquor stores are really not operating in the proper zoning laws. So if our cities would not allow people to open liquor stores and gun stores and have a population rate that for every 20,000 people you can have X, Y, and Z. Poor neighborhoods, zoning laws have been torn down. So you have wall-to-wall churches, wall-to-wall liquor stores. You have a strip club on one side, a liquor store on the other side, a grocery store selling terrible meat and terrible food on the other side, and then right across that you have a daycare. What kind of zoning sense does that make to protect people from negative elements? So I think in the urban core, the way we solve all of this is through government enforcing the laws that are already on the books when it comes to zoning. You can't open up a church unless you have so many parking spaces. You can't do this unless you have access for handicap. And then you create confusion in these poor neighborhoods. When you tear down the zoning, then you have mass confusion in the community. Go to a white community. Flip the script. You'll never see 75 churches, storefronts in a strip mall. You know, and I love my brothers and my sisters who call from the Lord, but we all have to be on the same block in the same corner. Some things you can see are intentional and purposeful for dysfunctionality. And I think if we do that, we can stop looking at why the liquor store is there. We can ask the mayor or the council, why did you authorize that? That should not have been authorized in those communities. Because if you have a liquor store, a strip club, a bar, and it's all in a neighborhood, it's ridiculous. So the government has failed urban cores, and we got to ask the question why. And the real question is, they don't want African American and brown communities to be successful. They take the tax dollars out, they decide to do economic development, and they do not develop in black communities. They say, okay, we'll come and develop in your community, but we're gonna give the person who's developing a tax break. So what does that mean? Well, that means less money for your school district. We'll give you the building, we'll give you the land, come build the thing, come make millions of dollars, but deprive the very people who live in that community. So we're talking about community benefits agreement to make sure that when development happens, it will have a long-term effect for the residents who live in that community. So we talk about local hiring. If you have a $25 million project, make sure everyone, we teach, am I my brother's keeper? So if you're a major corporation, a major development, and you're coming into a community, you have a responsibility to look after your neighbor. You cannot have be in a cyclone or an igloo or in a silo and say, oh, well, we're doing the right. No. We have a responsibility in America to care for our brothers and our sisters. So I say we solve this through zoning.
I got you.
We got some good people running, and I'm hoping them good folks get in office, and we can have good conversations about making sure that these corners are shut down. Now, I ain't opposed to, I'm like him. I don't want no child to use drugs. I don't want anybody to have to use drugs, but the reality is what it is. But should I lock you up for the rest of your life?
Speaking of the children, Dr. Shoenberger, what does this conversation look like and sound like when our young people are addressed about this subject? I mean, you talk about legislation, excellent point. Oftentimes we talk about laws that affect the lives of young African-American males, in particular, young people all over this country. What are you hearing them say? And then Representative Gainey, I want you to talk about this a little bit as well. What are you hearing young people say on this subject in class?
Surprisingly, I do compare this to, in terms of the misinterpretation of how people see students and youth today. When anybody sees college students, they automatically assume that they're binge drinking on campus, but the fact is, in terms of alcohol, many college students don't even drink while they're on campus. It's a small percentage of students. And when you ask students if they are accepting of legal use of marijuana, many students will say yes, and they have their own moral and personal reasons why they think marijuana should be legalized. But when you ask them, have they used it in the last 30 days? Have they used it in the last year? And are they planning on using it in the next month? So many students say they're not. And so they believe in the idea that you should be able to use marijuana if you would like, and the majority of them do. There are others who don't agree with that. But many students don't state that they're using it. And I see this in college students as I see college students on a daily basis. But when you look at data from the National Ad Health data set, so the numbers aren't changing, although the perception of marijuana use and acceptance is increasing. The students element from grades 7 to 12 that they followed up into their 30s and 40s, their marijuana use never changed. And so acceptance changes, but the use of it's not increasing in the youth.
Representative Gainey, what are you hearing from people in general on top of the young people?
You know, my thing is simple, regardless of who I talk to. It's difficult for me to accept something I'm not educated about. And I think a lot of this comes from a lack of education and the fact that from special interests, and I understand special interests, that all special interests has paid a lot of money to get what they want and to brand a misleading, misinformed education information that has left people misinformed than informed. And so when you look at it from that point of view, it's difficult to have a conversation with somebody when they don't really know. Because all they can talk about is the stereotypes that they see. And see, I understand stereotypes because I understand me. You know, for years I've told people, and this is what I mean by education, that history has cheated America. History's the biggest cheater of America. Because K through 12, I've studied European history. I know European history extremely well. I can walk in a room and feel comfortable with all Caucasians because I understand their history. So I understand American, what they consider to be American history. They call it, but it's really European history. The reality is why I say history has failed is because history should be an education institution built on talking about all the ethnicities that built America. So if we have better acceptance of each other, it's because we know one another, because K through 12 taught all of us how we all came and built this great land called America. So when we talk about marijuana, it's hard to have a conversation, here we go, I'm gonna tie it in, where special interest has diluted, misinformed people for their own pharmaceutical pleasure so that they can gain a greater market share in the market and leaving people misinformed, in which they teach each other uneducated type of facts to make them feel good about themselves without knowing the reality of the truth. And so since we have that, I have 8 times the people that look like me in the penitentiary because we don't understand that all of us use drugs the same way. So I went to the state capitol and said, listen, let's bring acceptance to government. Let's pass this law that says every state representative, every state senator got to take a drug test. There's over 200 members in the state house and the state senate. They say 1 out of 4 Americans is getting high off an illegal drug, but none of us have to take a drug test. But you want to stipulate the poor people that's on welfare got to take drug tests because they getting paid with taxpayer dollars and we getting paid with taxpayer dollars, but we ain't got to take a drug test. And the only ones that's uninformed is the American people, because they'll say, yeah, test that poor welfare person, but don't test that representative that's getting high on your supply called money.
I guess there's a thought process out there that in terms of the job market, you mentioned the boon in the economy for Colorado and Washington, that this will create a more lethargic workforce, that it will be harder to employ people and to keep good employees if, in fact, this is made legal. How does that sit in the minds of the panelists here? Who wants to take that on first? Is this a threat to the workforce in the United States? They rushed for that one, didn't they?
We must follow the statistics. Everywhere it was decriminalized, marijuana use did not go up. So let's deal with the facts and not fiction. So we have case studies all across the world where marijuana was decriminalized, where it was legalized, and the use of it did not affect the workforce. You're gonna have people gonna get high if it's free at Kmart. It's the same amount of people that make the same amount of choices. Let's not put people away forever for making choices that you and I would not make when it does not affect our life. So the employers must first of all stop getting free labor. And then talking about they're concerned about the workforce. Let's make it real. These Fortune 500 companies, I wish we can pull it up on the PowerPoint, who benefited from slavery, who benefited from Jim Crow, and who are benefiting from free labor in the slave market called prison right now. So they want to have a real conversation. Let's have a real conversation about rehabilitating those folks who you have helped locked up right now, and then that's when you can talk. You get some real good. There ain't too much marijuana smoking in the prison. You get some real good hard workers. They in shape. They want a second chance. So tell them to take the box off. Tell them to go to the jail and do some interviews and do some workforce development. And let's have a real conversation.
15 minutes left. I want to encourage you, if you have your questions written down, please get those passed forward. I have one here so far. Representative Gainey, have you agreed to a statewide tour on this subject? That was one question from the audience.
Yeah, yes, I have. As I stated earlier, Chairman Sterler, who's the chairman of the public hearings, I asked him, I floated a co-membership to see if people would sign on to my legislation. I'm still waiting to see how many Republicans I get. And it simply says, which way should the state go? Should we decriminalize marijuana or should we legalize it? And so I'm asking for public hearings all throughout the state, because I think that in order to get to our people, one, we need to go to them, and two, we need to have education. I stated before, the only way we can have acceptance is through education. So my hope is to have spirited dialogue throughout the state, so that people begin to understand that there's misinformation and there is information. Let's make sure they're informed.
I want to make sure we save time to get these in. If Pennsylvania legalized marijuana, it should not be taxed so high that people will go back to the street to get it. Thoughts?
Agreed. In Colorado and Washington, they haven't overtaxed the drug. There were two concerns, mainly from marijuana users in terms of legalization of marijuana, and that was the overtaxation of the drug, so then you would turn to the streets to go buy hopefully a cheaper way of purchasing it, and two, that there would become a monopoly, there'd be one or two companies, and they would be the only companies selling the drug themselves, and that hasn't happened. In Colorado, they have I think Colorado and Washington have over 250 companies involved in the marijuana business, and from that, they haven't overtaxed the drug, in which individuals who feel that they want access to the drug have felt that they've been able to go and purchase it at a distillery in a safe place in a way that they felt that the drug was safe. And so the data hasn't shown that has been the case.
There's two schools of thoughts. So one school of thought is tax it very high so that people won't want to purchase it. But really, that's not the true school of thought. Like, again, that's the promotion. The meaning behind that is very simple. What they're saying is that if we tax it high, we're still going to have street dealers. So I want you to understand that they're creating ways to say that we shouldn't legalize it. And what I tell them is what I tell all people, that's asking for perfection, and that's the enemy of progress. The reality of the situation is prohibition on liquor has been since 1939, if I'm accurate on my year, and you still got speakeasies. So you're not going to just completely have a perfection system. We got to perfect it as we go. So I agree that the tax shouldn't be low. I think it should be in the market that's established today. There's a market to determine where the tax should go, and we should follow that model. But the reality is they want to say that so that they can say, well, if we tax it high, then they're going to go back to the street dealer. So if they're going to go back to the street dealer, then there's no reason to do it. That's just, again, that's misinformation. And if you hear somebody say that, just ask them. Say, do you still have speakeasies even though prohibition is done? on liquor and see what they say. You can't, there's no perfect society. We just got to be able to create laws that improve humanity.
And if I read any of these questions wrong, somebody please bring it to my attention, because a couple of lines are a little difficult for me to make out. If marijuana is legalized, what happens to people in prison for possession? How can we help them get back on their feet?
I want to thank the state representative for his openness and his honesty to help us have a conversation around these issues, because it affects the community. And I think that part of the tax money, if it's ever legalized, should go to the rehabilitation of those who have been incarcerated for marijuana use specifically.
That eliminated one question. Go ahead.
Yep, and then those individuals should be able to work in the farms where they can get a CDL and drive. Now, I'm not for the legalization of marijuana. Let me first make that clear. I'm for decriminalization. But if it happens, I still want to be in the conversation, because you need voices from all sides. And I think that's what he said well. We're not going to have an excellent, perfect, there will always be flaws, because we're flawed. I mean, I got flaws. Everybody has flaws. But if we work together, I think we can use the money in a way to educate so that young people, when they have no more use, I mean, we all been young. We all made mistakes. So I think once it comes in place, we help those who have been victimized now that it has been legal to get back into society, and we use a portion of that for rehabilitation in prison.
Can I segue on that? Because there's another question that says, what effect has decriminalization of marijuana had on recidivism in states that it's been decriminalized, if any?
Yeah, if you go to the model of Colorado, I think she can speak to that. How many jobs you said they created? Over 20,000 new jobs, and I'm quite sure that those are in the farming industry, reproduction industry, transportation industry, and I think those people who are maybe using marijuana because they're depressed and can't get a job, or they've been out and they have recidivized 2 or 3 times. I mean, it's rough when you can't get a job. It's rough when you can't get welfare. It's rough when you can't go visit your family, because as he, as the doctor eloquently said, that now you're smoking, you know, your social worker come in, they're a mandatory reporter. You get disconnected from your family. You get disconnected from the community. You come out of prison. There's no place for you to stay. There's no place in society that says you are a returning citizen. I mean, it is unimaginable what these men and women from all colors go through. But particularly African Americans come back to a community where there's a lack of jobs if you have a bachelor's degree. My children have graduate degrees. And it's been proven statistically that a white male with a felony has the same chances of getting a job with a black man with a bachelor's degree. There's still disparities. So I think in that term, we got to create opportunities for success, and we got to have open, honest dialogue to help the least of them, those who don't have a voice, to create pathways for success. If you've done the crime, you do the time, it should be over.
The Rev is on point. And so let me say that first. And secondly, and he can correct me, I mean, I ain't a Bible scholar, but I know a little bit. Here's what we've created, and this is why I said the biggest enemy to America is not foreign, it's domestic. And it's been the war on drugs. Let me tell you what happens. You come out of jail on a non-violent crime because you sold marijuana, you sold drugs, you used drugs, whatever. You come out of jail, and they give you this thing called a felony or a misdemeanor. So now you got this felony and misdemeanor, and it's hard for you to get a job. It's hard for you to get housing. Back in the day, what the Bible said is that the lepers had to go somewhere else, because since they was lepers, they didn't want them in normal society. We have created lepers out of our own people in the name of a better humanity. Out of public safety, we have birthed more drugs in our streets than we've done in saving lives. I need y'all to understand that. Here's what the war on drugs and public safety is giving you. It's giving you more homicides, more suicides, more ODs than ever before. The war on drugs with $50 billion has produced carfentanil, fentanyl, ecstasy, and all these other drugs that are on our street. We have blown the type of money we could have used to offset college, send our kids to school, continue to be a world power in education throughout the world, and we did it in the name of public safety that never did nothing to improve public health, but punish people not once, but twice by making them lepers in society because they come out of jail with a felony or a misdemeanor. Hard to go to work, hard to get housing. Everything is more difficult, but though I paid my time, you still outcast me and wonder why I'm in the same system and recidivism won't go down. It's a system that if we, listen, criminal justice does not need reform. It needs reconstructing. The criminal justice system is penetrated by poison called the war on drugs, and until we wipe it completely out, we can't grow as humanity. We've created more addictions, almost more than we've created people coming out of college with an education. When it gets to that level, we are not helping humanity, we are hurting humanity, and as long as we are hurting the people that we say we serve through the blood of Christ, because we say that God is first, if that's the truth, help us change these drug laws.
All right. Get on to Dr. Balsan real quick, and then I think we can go to the audience for actual questions. You know, an audience member pointed out, is the point of the panel the legalization of marijuana or the disproportionate imprisonment of people of color over such use? And that does seem to be a recurring theme. In your mind, is that the primary issue behind this whole thing of decriminalizing marijuana? What do you think the primary issue is when it comes to this issue?
Well, I'd like to believe that this, if you will, the sanctity of a family is the issue. And when you destroy that, you've created a grave disservice, not only to that family, but to the rest of society. And I've seen it. And that's the concern. I can line up, I come to this from two sides, obviously. I have some ambivalence about it, I'll be very clear. There are certain things about legalization that actually are attractive. I would like to know that people that are using marijuana are using marijuana. Not something else. I would like to know that that it's pure, that it's controlled, that they know what they're getting. Good Lord, all you have to do is talk to the coroner about fentanyl. That's all you have to do is just have one short discussion about that. But I think the real bottom line here is the sanctity of families, and we're not doing the service to the people that are trying to raise their children by putting one or both of them in prison.
Somebody says, in states with legal marijuana use, are there agencies like the PLCB that prevent those who are underage from purchasing? And if so, are those stores prosecuted for sales to underage people?
Yeah, so if you are in one of those states and you sell marijuana to an underage individual, you'll be prosecuted just as if you would in terms of selling alcohol to an underage individual. In terms of getting these passed, these states had to come up with regulations and rules, just as Pennsylvania with medicalizing marijuana. There's a lot of legality that comes with this. And they have these in place to prosecute buildings, sales, individuals, if they're selling it to underage individuals. Okay. And I do want to make one other point in terms of the doctor here and the family. Many times we have a conversation of incarcerating men and the effects on the family, but it is known that if you incarcerate the mother, and it's the mother who goes to prison for an extended amount of years, the emotional toll it takes on the children is actually worse than incarcerating the father. And so when we're talking about 60% of females in prison right now are going to jail because of drug-related offenses. If these women have children and you want to know what will happen to the effects of incarcerating women, then you might see negative effects on these children. And so I think when you talk about decriminalizing marijuana, I think the family is still, for me, one of the biggest points to make.
If the city took an action to decriminalize marijuana, but the county and the state didn't. Could that have any force? Could that change things?
Philadelphia's did it with Philadelphia's done it, Pittsburgh's done it with small amounts of marijuana. I think York has done it, there's a couple others, one or two that I'm missing, and I apologize. They've already did it for small amounts of marijuana. So the counties may not have done it, but the cities have done it, and it stood up.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a student here at Penn State Behrend. I'm one of the students of Dr. Shoenberger right there. I just have a question. Well, prior to coming to Penn State Behrend, I had little exposure to like criminology and how like, you know, students can be deterred from actually committing crime. And I actually agree with you guys that education is like one of the primary factors that we need to focus on. Do you think students' exposure to like, you know, how to deter crime should be much more, you know, focused on in like from K to 12? Instead of like having to wait till get to college and learning about all of these, you know, methods to stop like getting involved with crime and stuff like that?
I think the answer for many things is that education at very young ages is a key to learning the effects, what the drug is, and how to use, and how not to get involved or to get involved, et cetera. Educating the youth is the way to go. And we've seen this with other things as well. And we talk about tobacco and educating youth for tobacco. There are campaigns in elementary schools against tobacco use. And so I think starting young would be a key if we would decriminalize marijuana.
I think education is the key. We must recognize that America is a capitalistic society. Being a former businessman, we make money off of everyone's weakness. So we sell a lot, then we sell a key to the lock. That's America. We lock people up in prison and we hire them. The state pays for their uniform, pays for their meals, and then we lobby congressmen in the state, and then we put prisons on the stock market so you and I can invest with our pension funds, go into prisons. So if I own a prison and it's private, what do I need? I need more prisoners. So what do? I go to publishing houses, because they're on the stock market, and I begin to de-educate America. So I don't teach them their constitutional rights in kindergarten. I teach them American, European history will not help them say, if I commit this crime, I gotta do this time. So now peer pressure won't be so much of a peer pressure to me if I knew for real, that I was going to jail and I had a probability of not coming out. And we think children know all these things. They don't know, they're not teaching. You know, McGraw-Hill had to recant a textbook in history that they said African Americans came here as happy indentured servants. So when we look at the profitability of prisons make a lot of money for capitalism. And because it's on the stock market, every marketing agent for the prison system is marketing to schools to make sure that education is not taking place. So we have an American right as people. If the people don't unite, it's black children today. Crack was a black problem. Now opiate is a white problem. And it's because we have not educated our children how to deal with stress. I'm a religious teacher. We have not taught them, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. You know, we just go up, now we say, now we give everybody a trophy. We say, don't hurt the children's feelings. You know, my wife's a third grade teacher, and I pray for her every single day. Because they done took all the tools away. All the tools. Let them kids go out for the Olympic team.
Some people are afraid to stand up and go, I'm for this in public. They're in the closet. So how do we get them involved?
I think part of the process is what we're doing now, is having open, honest dialogue in an environment that is safe, where people don't feel retribution. I think America is angry. Everyone is angry, whether you're black, middle class, or low. Our future is in flux. And we have, and I keep saying, we have let corporations go too far. where people are afraid of retaliation. And who are we really afraid of is each other. So on the television, they have made black men, they have demonized us, that every black man is angry and frustrated. They have given stereotypes. All black men don't sell drugs. We have more black men in college right now than we do in prison. See, we can't get the real information out. We don't use drugs more than anybody else. We don't kill each other more than anybody else. When white people kill each other, you don't hear white on white crime. White people kill each other at the same rate we kill each other. But you don't hear about it. The media makes us afraid of one another. We got to come out of our houses. God knows this is a good start, and we got to come together as a people and start the dialogue through voter registration, voter education, get legislatures in place who will represent our interests. And we got to get money out of politics. You want to know how we do it? We got to get money out of politics.
All right.
It don't make any sense that I got to raise $100 million or run for a $100,000 job. Mm-hmm. What kind of craziness is that? Who do I really work for? I ain't work a $100,000 job. I got to go raise them. Come on, man. We know who they work for. So we as the people got to raise up and get money out of politics. The people united can never be defeated. We got to get back to protesting and marching. We can no longer be silent. And you a leader. You a leader. Lead others. Don't look for nobody to follow you. Lead yourself. That's and right. Go find somebody like her, somebody like him. Y'all link up and y'all lead together. And that's the only way we're going to turn this thing around. The people got to get the money out of politics.
That's right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our time.
I turn in closing to the September 5th Washington Post article that was penned by Reverend William Barber. He's one of my modern heroes, William Barber and the Rabbi Jonah Pesner, which was offered just after the Charlottesville travesty. And it goes like this. As they return to work, our elected representatives need to understand that ultimately the anger they are seeing is far less about statues than it is about policies and action. We prefer concrete action to heartfelt statements, no matter how profound. We refuse to be silent as people in our communities continue to face threats based on the color of their skin or in the manner in which they pray. Micah chapter 6, verse 8 teaches us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. These are active, they're not passive pursuits. We are enjoined to seek and create the change that our world so desperately needs. For Americans, this means the protection and promotion of voting rights. It means honest reckoning with school-to-prison pipeline and reversal of the choices that have led unprecedented mass incarceration. It means deconstructing the structural inequities that create educational disadvantages, early mortality, and generational poverty. Will our country's political leaders rise to meet these challenges? Will they confront our past and work to uproot the bigoted policies that embolden hate, that allow the dehumanization of neighbors and undermine our democratic foundation? Will they repent for their silence in the past and the present? If they fail to do so, they will be complicit in the damage that American bigotry wreaks. Do not wait until hate comes to your town to condemn it and to root it out. Words alone are insufficient. A new agenda based on inclusion, empowerment, and opportunity for all is what is required. To condemn white supremacy, but to perpetuate the policies that enrich inequality is unacceptable. I leave you with a charge from Martin Luther King. He says, the time is always right to do what's right, Have a good evening. Be safe going home.